The helicopter blades whipped dust into miniature tornadoes as we descended toward forward operating base Epsilon. My stomach clenched, not from the landing, but from the desolate landscape spreading before me. Rocky terrain stretched to distant mountains that seemed to swallow the horizon like teeth. Another punishment post, another chance to fail. "Welcome to the edge of nowhere, Captain Brooks." The pilot's voice crackled through my headset. I adjusted my pack as the chopper touched down. The heat hit me first, dry and oppressive, like opening an oven door. Then came the smell. Dust, diesel, and something else. Something faintly metallic that made my nostrils flare. A young lieutenant jogged toward me, his salute almost comically eager. His face was smooth, untested, with a brightness in his eyes I'd lost years ago. "Lieutenant Harris, sir. Welcome to FOB Epsilon." His voice carried over the dying rotor wash. "We've been expecting you." "At ease, Lieutenant." I slung my rucksack over my shoulder, feeling the weight of more than just equipment. The faces of my last command flashed through my mind, half of them dead after an ambush I should have anticipated. As Harris led me through the compound, I cataloged everything with practiced efficiency. Sandbagged positions, prefab structures weathered by sand and sun, soldiers moving with the measured pace of men conserving energy in brutal heat. But something felt off. The men we passed, they moved with purpose, but their eyes told a different story. Dark circles, darting glances, the subtle twitch of sleep deprivation. "How's morale?" I asked, watching a specialist nearly drop his rifle when a distant engine backfired. Harris hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "Holding steady, sir. It's been quiet lately. Too quiet. Makes the men jumpy." I nodded, not believing him for a second. In Afghanistan, too quiet usually preceded something bloody. "The outpost secures supply lines through 3 valleys," Harris continued as we approached the command center. "Strategic position, but remote." Remote was an understatement. We were at the ass end of nowhere, the kind of place the Army sends you when they don't know what else to do with you. But as we entered the command building, I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching us from the empty hills beyond the wire. The outgoing captain's handshake was clammy, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Captain Reynolds fidgeted with his papers as he briefed me, rushing through details like a man late for his own evacuation. "Supply runs every 2 weeks, communication spotty in bad weather, local villages mostly cooperative." He trailed off, glancing at the window where afternoon shadows stretched across the compound. "And the incidents?" I pressed, tapping the folder of reports I'd been sent. Reynolds swallowed hard. "Local superstitions affecting morale, nothing substantial." Later that afternoon, I met Sergeant Patel in the medical bay, a converted shipping container smelling of antiseptic and sweat. The medic's hands were steady, but his eyes looked as tired as the men he treated. "Sleep disturbances, Captain. More than normal for deployment." Patel closed a cabinet of medications. "I'm going through sedatives faster than painkillers." "PTSD?" I asked. "Something different?" They all described the same thing: feeling watched during guard duty, seeing movements where nothing exists. My next stop was communications, where Corporal Nguyen hunched over equipment, headphones pressed to one ear. He barely acknowledged my presence, his focus absolute on what sounded like static to me. "Anything from command?" I asked. "No, sir. Just listening." Nguyen adjusted a dial, his fingers twitching slightly. "Sometimes there's something in the white noise. Voices, maybe." That night in my quarters, I reviewed incident reports by the yellow glow of a desk lamp. Equipment failures with no explanation. Sentries firing at empty terrain, increasing requests for sleep medication. The light flickered once, twice. I looked up, rubbing gritty eyes. A shadow moved across the wall, independent of any object casting it. I blinked, and it was gone. Just fatigue from the journey, I told myself. Nothing more. But when I finally slept, I dreamed of eyes watching from corners where darkness pooled too deeply, of figures that dissolved when I tried to focus on them. And underneath it all, whispers in a language I almost recognized. "Contact right!" Private Jenkins screamed, his M4 spitting fire into the darkness before I could stop him. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" I bellowed, the night vision giving everyone's face a sickly green pallor. 3 days into my command, and I was already on a night patrol with a jumpy kid shooting at shadows. The Afghan mountains loomed around us, silent witnesses to our intrusion. The air felt wrong, too still, too quiet, as if the normal nighttime sounds had been smothered by an invisible weight. "I saw something moving between the rocks, sir," Jenkins insisted, his voice cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the night chill. It wasn't right. Lieutenant Harris and I swept the area Jenkins had fired toward. Nothing. No blood trails, no footprints in the dusty soil, no sign of anything living or dead. "Could have been a dog," Harris offered without conviction. "It wasn't a fucking dog," Jenkins whispered, eyes wild. "It moved like smoke, but deliberate." I grabbed his shoulder, feeling the tremors running through him. "Pull yourself together, soldier. We could have killed civilians out here." We continued the patrol, but something had changed. The darkness between rocky outcroppings seemed deeper somehow. Twice I caught myself staring at shadows that seemed to shift when directly observed. Cold spots hit us randomly, pockets of air 15 degrees cooler than their surroundings, with no wind to explain them. The sensation of being followed grew with every step, raising the hair on my neck. Years of combat experience had taught me to trust that feeling. But when I turned, rifle raised, there was only darkness folding back on itself. That same night, the guard woke me at 3 a.m. Jenkins had been found wandering the perimeter in his underwear, glassy-eyed and unresponsive. "He doesn't remember leaving his bunk, sir," Sergeant Patel explained after sedating the private. "Fifth incident like this in 2 weeks. Men sleepwalking, night terrors. It's escalating." "Psychological contagion," I said firmly. "Stress, isolation, fear, spreading through suggestion." Patel didn't argue, but his expression said he wasn't convinced. Neither was I. "We found it bricked up in the old bunker section, sir." Lieutenant Harris placed the weathered journal on my desk. The cover was cracked leather. The Cyrillic lettering faded, but still legible. Engineering team was prepping the area for demolition. My fingers traced the Soviet hammer and sickle embossed on the spine. "They were here in the 80s, I said, recalling my military history. "Same mission, different war." "You read Russian, Captain?" Harris asked. "Enough." My military intelligence rotation had given me the basics. Let's see what our Soviet predecessors thought of this godforsaken outpost. The early entries were what you'd expect. Supply logs, patrol schedules, complaints about food and headquarters. But 60 pages in, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic. "April 14th, 1985. I translated slowly. Gregor saw it again tonight. The shadow that moves against the wind. 3 men fired into the darkness. Nothing there. Headquarters thinks we're mad or lying. Maybe both." Harris leaned closer. "Sounds familiar." I turned pages, the entries growing more disturbing. "They come in dreams first, then at the edge of sight. moving between sleep and waking, feeding on fear and exhaustion, making us see things. The final entries chilled my blood. The Soviet captain described his men turning on each other, believing their comrades were possessed by the shadows. The journal ended abruptly after documenting a massacre. That night, I jerked awake standing at the base perimeter, the biting cold of the Afghan night cutting through my t-shirt. I had no memory of leaving my quarters. In the distance, against the pale mountain backdrop, human silhouettes moved in formation. But when I flipped my night vision on, there was nothing there. Just darkness shifting against darkness. I stood frozen, watching shadows that couldn't exist, cast by no one. "I'm not crazy, Captain," Specialist Wilson insisted from his restraints in the medical bay. Blood crusted around his fingernails where he'd clawed at his own face. "They get inside when you sleep. They whisper things." A week had passed, and FOB Epsilon was coming apart at the seams. Sleep deprivation had turned the outpost into a powder keg. 3 soldiers were confined after violent outbursts. Equipment malfunctioned constantly. The radio crackled with static that sounded almost like voices. "Sedatives aren't working anymore," Sergeant Patel confided, his own face gaunt from lack of sleep. He lowered his voice. "It's like something's interfering with the medication. Fighting it." I'd witnessed too much to dismiss it as stress or coincidence. Men describing identical hallucinations, shadow figures at the periphery of vision, dreams of suffocation, and whispers in ancient languages. "Has anyone actually seen these things directly?" I asked, knowing how it sounded. Patel's eyes met mine. "Would you believe them if they had?" I had no answer. The comms tent had become Corporal Nguyen's personal domain. Maps covered every surface, marked with swirling symbols that matched patterns he claimed to hear in the static. The cramped space reeked of body odor and the metallic tang of marker ink. "They've always been here, Captain," Nguyen said without looking up from his radio. His fingers twisted dials with obsessive precision. "Before us, before the Soviets, before anyone. Using human minds as gateways." "Gateways to what?" I asked, disturbed by the patterns emerging across his maps, concentric circles centered on our location. "To here, to us." Nguyen finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and dilated. "Ancient entities that predate human civilization." I ordered Patel to evaluate him, but that night, the base plunged into darkness. The generators failed simultaneously, backup power stuttering to life only in critical areas. In the eerie red glow of emergency lighting, I saw it happen. My shadow, cast against the wall of the command center, detached itself. It moved independently, stretching and warping, before dissolving into the greater darkness. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't asleep. It was real. When power returned an hour later, Corporal Nguyen was gone. The communications equipment lay shattered, and carved into the metal walls were symbols identical to those in his maps and the Soviet journal. Geometric patterns that hurt the eyes if you looked too long. Something had taken him, or he had joined them. Either way, I had to find him. "Stay tight, maintain visual contact," I ordered as we moved into the mountains. Besides me and Lieutenant Harris, I'd brought 4 soldiers, all showing minimal signs of the sleep disturbance, all armed with enough firepower to hold off a small army. None of us mentioned that we might not be facing anything bullets could stop. Daylight seemed to fade too quickly as we pushed deeper into the rocky terrain. Shadows stretched impossibly long. The temperature dropped with each step, our breath forming clouds in air that should have been warm. "Captain, I hear something," Specialist Rodriguez whispered, his head cocked. "Voices, but not in any language I know." I heard it too, a sibilant whispering that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. We found the cave entrance hidden behind a rockfall. It wasn't on any of our maps. Inside, the beam of our flashlights revealed evidence of previous occupants, rusted Soviet equipment, older British colonial artifacts, and clay pottery fragments that looked ancient. People have been coming here for centuries, Harris murmured, crouching to examine a weathered rifle with Cyrillic markings. Deeper in the caves, the air grew thick and hard to breathe. Our lights seemed dimmer, unable to fully penetrate the unnatural darkness. And there, in a chamber where the walls were covered with the same symbols from Nguyen's maps, we found him. He sat cross-legged, staring at shadows that seemed to pulse and writhe across the stone. His eyes were open, but unseeing, lips moving in silent communion with something we couldn't perceive. "Corporal Nguyen," I said, approaching slowly, "we're taking you home." As we moved to extract him, Rodriguez suddenly raised his weapon toward Private Collins. "That's not Collins," he screamed, finger tightening on the trigger. "Look at his shadow. It's all wrong." I tackled him as the shot went wide, the gunfire deafening in the enclosed space. "He's gone, sir," Rodriguez sobbed beneath me. "Whatever's wearing his face isn't him anymore." We emerged from the cave to find figures surrounding us, human shapes in local dress. Insurgents, I thought at first, bringing my weapon up. Then the first bullets tore through them, and instead of falling, they dissolved into smoke and darkness. By the time we fought our way back to base, 2 men were missing. Lieutenant Harris, who'd been skeptical from the beginning, helped me bandage a gash on my arm. "We can't fight what we don't understand," he said quietly. "And I don't think bullets are going to win this one, sir." That night, the Shadows launched their first coordinated attack. Sentries reported seeing dead comrades walking the perimeter. Men fired at shapes that turned out to be fellow soldiers. The darkness had learned our greatest weakness, each other. "Request immediate extraction and reinforcement," I shouted into the radio, fighting to be heard through the static. "FOB Epsilon is under sustained attack by unknown hostiles. We have multiple casualties, and—" "Captain Brooks, be advised." The distant voice of the command center controller cut through. "Weather systems preclude immediate air support. Nearest QRF is 72 hours out. Can you confirm nature of hostile forces?" I stared at the radio handset. How could I explain shadow entities that fed on fear, that used sleep deprivation to break down the barriers between perception and reality? "Negative," I said finally. "Cannot confirm, but we won't last 72 hours. The storm had arrived an hour after sunset, unnatural in its sudden ferocity." Lightning revealed momentary glimpses of figures surrounding the base. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of shadow forms just beyond the perimeter. I gathered what remained of my command team in the operations center. Lieutenant Harris, his youthful optimism replaced by grim determination. Sergeant Patel, medical kit hanging from exhausted shoulders. The handful of NCOs still functional enough to lead. "We've cross-referenced the Soviet journal with Nguyen's notes," Harris explained, spreading papers across the table. "These entities have been targeting military outposts throughout history. They're drawn to concentrated fear and stress. They feed on it," Patel added, "using sleep deprivation to weaken mental barriers." "So we're food," I said flatly. "No, sir." Harris pointed to a diagram from Nguyen's notes. "We're a gateway. They need human minds to fully manifest in our reality." Outside, the wind howled with voices that weren't entirely wind. I made my decision. We used the generators to create a perimeter of light, full illumination on all approaches. They seem weaker in brightness. I turned to Patel. "Sedate the most affected in the central building. Everyone else forms defensive positions." No one questioned the orders. No one mentioned that we were preparing to fight shadows. The plan worked at first. Under harsh floodlights, the shadow manifestations receded. The base fell into an uneasy quietude, broken only by the rumble of generators and the storm's fury. Then the first generator failed, plunging the eastern section into darkness. "Captain, movement east," Harris called through the radio. "Multiple hostiles approaching." "Insurgents or—" I couldn't finish the question. "Unknown, sir. They don't move right." The second generator blew 10 minutes later, then the third. In the command center, the lights flickered as shadows deepened in every corner, taking familiar shapes. The faces of soldiers I'd lost in previous deployments, civilians caught in crossfire. Each one a personal guilt given form. An explosion rocked the base. Real, physical destruction. Either actual insurgents were attacking in coordination with the shadows, or the entities had gained enough power to affect the material world. My radio crackled. "Captain, the medical bay." Patel's voice cut off in a scream. I ran through rain-slicked paths to the medical building. Inside, chaos reigned. The sedated soldiers convulsed simultaneously, their shadows rising from their bodies like dark smoke. Patel fought to restrain one, but 3 more cornered him, moving with unnatural coordination, eyes completely black. Drawing my sidearm, I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The possessed soldiers turned as one, fixing those obsidian eyes on me. "The gateway," one said in a voice that echoed strangely. "The anchor." They meant me, I realized with sudden clarity. The shadows were using specific individuals as focal points, those most damaged by psychological trauma. My past failures, my guilt over lost men, had made me their primary target. Somehow, we restored order. Patel administered stronger sedatives, but as dawn approached, the attacks intensified from all sides. The final generator failed with a whining death rattle, plunging the base into darkness, except for emergency lighting. I stood in the command center, watching shadow figures converge from all directions on our thermal imaging system. FOB Epsilon was lost. I gave the only order left. "Evacuate. Everyone on the remaining vehicles. Now." As soldiers scrambled to board the 2 functioning Humvees, I checked the self-destruct protocol, originally designed to prevent sensitive equipment from falling to the enemy. It would serve a different purpose tonight. Lieutenant Harris found me programming the detonation sequence. "Sir, your transport is ready." I didn't look up. "I'm not coming, Lieutenant." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "They're drawn to me. As long as I'm here, they'll focus on the base, not the evacuation. Someone has to stay behind." I pressed Nguyen's notes and the Soviet journal into his hands. "Get these to intelligence. Make them understand what we faced here." A look of understanding crossed Harris's face. The last Humvee disappeared down the mountain path as I stood in the command center, surrounded by deepening shadows. Each took the form of someone I'd failed. Johnson from Kandahar, Martinez from that bloody day outside Kabul, civilians whose names I never knew. "You won't have them," I told the darkness. "Not today." The self-destruct sequence blinked on the console. 5-459, 458. I'd already doused the command center with fuel from the emergency generators. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers filling my head with promises and threats. "I know what you are now," I said, feeling strangely calm. "You've been feeding on us for centuries. War after war. Outpost after outpost." A shadow wearing the face of my former XO stepped forward. "We are eternal," it said in a voice like sand shifting. We were here before your kind learned to make fire. Maybe so. I raised the flare gun. But fire's what we're good at. The shadow lunged as I fired. The flare caught the fuel-soaked floor, and flames erupted in a hungry rush. Light blazed through the command center, momentarily pushing back the darkness. The self-destruct counter reached 0 as fire consumed the outpost. I felt a moment of pure clarity in those final seconds, understanding that what we'd faced wasn't evil in any human sense, just ancient and hungry and patient. The explosion tore through FOB Epsilon, illuminating the entire valley with purifying light. I thought of Harris and the others, hoping the distraction would cover their escape. I thought of all the men I'd lost over the years, and wondered if this final act might balance the scales. Then there was only light, and for a moment, blessed silence. Lieutenant David Harris sat at his desk in the officers' quarters at Ramstein Air Base, Germany. 6 months had passed since FOB Epsilon. 6 months of debriefings where his account was dismissed as mass hallucination caused by contaminated water or local drug exposure. Captain Elijah Brooks was listed as killed in action during an insurgent attack. No mention of shadow entities. No recognition of what they'd really faced. The unmarked package had arrived that morning. No return address, just his name typed on plain paper. Inside, a single page torn from what appeared to be a journal. The handwriting started steady but deteriorated across the page. They didn't die in the fire. Fire doesn't kill shadows. I've led them elsewhere, away from our forces. They follow me now, but I'm learning their weaknesses. If you're reading this, they can be fought, but not with bullets or bombs. They fear understanding more than light. The deeper the shadow, the more it fears being named. Harris set the page down with trembling fingers. When he turned off his desk lamp that night, he couldn't help but notice. His shadow lingered a moment after the light was gone.